What's up, guys? Justin Morgan here, Carved Up Vegan Muscle. And today's video, I am continuing on in the Principles of Dieting series, or dieting for bodybuilding, for muscle growth, and to get lean. Somebody asked me in the first video, could I do a video on how to get shredded? To get shredded! Like Shredder! No, really this is it. I wish I could say there was like some kind of magical formula you could follow, or that you could follow to get like competition type lean, but it's not out there. I know like Mike Chang and some of those guys will like make these videos and make huge promises, just got to get some lean proteins. And they promise these magical results, but it really just doesn't work that way. I wish that it did. I wish there was something, easy that you could do, but these are the principles. You can follow these. I don't really recommend that people get a whole lot leaner than like around 10% body fat. A lot of bodybuilders will do that. They'll get down to like 6, some even to 5% body fat, and that is not sustainable though. If they stayed like that, they would end up looking like stick figures eventually, because they are losing muscle in the process of doing that. 100%, every single one of them. There is not a bodybuilder that has ever stepped on stage and been like that lean, where they're like 5 and 6% body fat, that has not lost muscle to get down that lean. Getting down to like 10% body fat, you should have a pretty defined six-pack then. I see a lot of people like walk out and they're like, yeah, I'm at like 5% body fat, and they're really more like 10, 11% body fat. And I don't know where they're getting their information from, but anyway, so maybe I'll just throw that out there. But you know what? I think 10 to 15% body fat is really a pretty good one. That you'll look really good that way. So in this second principle, we're going to move on to macronutrients. I'll throw up the chart again for you real quick. Take a look at it. And that chart that you just looked at is kind of emphasizing the importance of these different things. So as you can see from the chart, macronutrients is not as important as overall caloric balance. If you're eating enough calories, you have a lot of leeway on everything else. If you're trying to gain muscle, eating more calories is pretty much the biggest principle. And then the next one, we're going to talk about macronutrients. And where macronutrients can come into effect is when you are looking at like cutting and getting down to a more towards like that competition level readiness that I mentioned before. And you're going to see this part of the series kind of focuses on that, and I'll just go on with the information. But many people overemphasize the principle and overemphasize specific macronutrients. I'm personally of the opinion that you can follow whatever kind of diet you want and still get fantastic results. Every macronutrient has its own function and can be of benefit to a certain degree. I know people that follow the 80-10-10 diet. I built muscle on the 80-10-10 diet while following it, and people have built impressive bodies and strength at all levels. You can check out my buddy Mike Velocity. Follows extremely high carbohydrate diet, pretty low fat, low protein. I've mentioned Chris Califano before. From what I've seen, he's not a real friendly kind of guy, but I won't deny that he didn't build a really great body. There's a few others. Carl S. followed the 80-10-10 diet for a while. He ended up kind of moving on to other types of diets as he progressed on, which I don't blame him for. But I've also seen people follow low-carb ketogenic diets and do pretty well doing that. I haven't really seen a lot of people get really big, get muscular following those kind of diets. I've mostly seen people cut down for doing that, but Corey McCarthy, I'm not really a fan of everything Corey says, but he has a YouTube channel and he's a vegan, follows like ketogenic type diets. I think he overemphasizes some principles, and he takes some research that I'll discuss here in a minute, and he tries to apply it in areas where I don't really think it's applicable. But nevertheless, he seems to be doing okay. He's built a fair amount of muscle, and he really is a fan of ketogenic diets. Obviously, there's lots of non-vegans that follow that type of dieting and seem to have done okay. And then I've also seen people follow extremely high protein intakes and reach their goals doing that. So, all three macronutrients, all three of them people have done well on. So I do not personally recommend any specific kind of diet. And although it's possible to reach your goal on any type of diet, that doesn't mean it's always advantageous to take, whatever route that may be. And I do actually advocate one type of diet, and that would be a whole foods, plant-based diet. I think whole foods are great. I think as more whole foods you can enter it into your diet, which really you could emphasize beans, nuts, seeds, and that kind of thing in your diet, and you would probably, get a high protein kind of diet. And depending on which one you chose to emphasize, you get a high protein, high carbohydrate diet, or you get a high protein, high fat diet, or higher fat, higher carbohydrate. I don't know if either one of those would provide like a real high amount, but it depends on what's high to you and what's relative to what you're doing. So I guess I'll just leave that at that. But when an athlete reaches the very highest level of competition, though, being too dogmatic about macronutrient ratios or the percentage of carbohydrate, fat, and protein might actually become a limiting factor, just because it can limit the range of foods available to you. I'll begin with what most people really overemphasize, and that is protein. Protein plays a very key role in metabolism, DNA synthesis, but for our purposes, namely for muscle building, it plays a big role in tissue repair. Bodybuilder, strength athlete, and conditioning coach, and strength and conditioning coach, and diet researcher Eric Helms, along with Alan Aragon and some other people. This is the article or study that I was mentioning before. They did a study on drug-free athletes who were at fairly low levels of body fat and high levels of athletic performance. So they were very good athletes. They were already very lean going into the study. In the study, they put the athletes on a weight loss program and attempted to see what the most ideal intake for protein would be for preserving muscle mass, meaning that by being in a caloric deficient, or I shouldn't say caloric deficient, being in a hypocaloric state or a caloric deficit, they were losing weight, they were cutting body fat, even though they were already lean, and getting down to a lower body fat. The conclusion of the study seemed to indicate that the higher the protein intake, the less muscle was lost by the athletes over the course of the study. So they did various amounts of protein looking at, and the more protein they gave, the less overall muscle that was lost during the hypocaloric state. Protein intakes were up to 2 to 3 grams per kilogram, or you could call that 1 to about 1.5 grams per pound. So at 200 pounds, that means I would be taking anywhere from 200 to 300 grams of protein per day, and that's a lot of protein. But there are some other factors there. There are several reasons that the findings of that study do not necessarily apply to the majority of us. Namely, if you are not in the single-digit body fat range, or you're already very lean, you're carrying a six-pack, then those protein intakes may not necessarily apply to you the same way that it did to those athletes. You may not really need that in order to minimize those kinds of losses. You may be able to follow a much lower protein intake diet. That's not to say that you won't benefit. Like I said before, there are athletes at all levels of competition that I've seen with different ratios and macronutrients that have been emphasized that did well, but I'm just saying that if you don't follow those, that's not necessarily going to be a make or break thing for most people. Those protein intakes are also not necessarily applicable if you're in a calorie surplus. Cat's flipping out over there. In which case those intakes especially would not apply to you. So to put it in perspective, when you see cancer patients in the hospital, they're experiencing muscle wasting, we only put them on 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram. Or for you guys that work in pounds, that would be about 0.45 to 0.7 grams per pound. So chances are that eating more than 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, that would be more than the cancer patients that we see. For 99% of all people that would hear this, is going to be far more protein than is necessary for you to experience any benefit from whatsoever. If you are in a calorie surplus, or at least eating maintenance calories to maintain your weight and to build muscle, then the amount of protein that you would benefit from is still, much lower. And by lean body mass, I mean muscle, organ, bone tissue, anything that's not fat, essentially. So if you are 200 pounds and 20% body fat, then you could subtract the 40 pounds of body fat and 160 grams is probably more protein than you would be able to measure any noticeable difference from consuming while in a hypocaloric state. If you do not follow those protein intakes, it's also not the end of the world, but your muscle losses while dieting to lose weight might be slightly more than they could be otherwise. And I'm going to have to cut it off there. The video is getting too long. So look back for the next video in this series continuing on macronutrients and talking about the topics of fat and carbohydrate intake. You guys take it easy, and I'll talk to you next time.